National Center for Special Education Research, we've conducted these longitudinal studies of seeing what parts, what specific actions or steps or strategies for implementation are most important. And it's really interesting because I think we have a lot of hunches about how it works. And all of those hunches are definitely a little bit right based on our context. But I think it's different from saying, here are the 27 things that you need to do to be able to sustain, and being able to say, for schools that sustained, these were the few best bets for implementation. And then those that didn't, these were the missing ingredients where if those weren't in place, they would do it. And so our research over time, and we're continuing this. So this was research in what's called Tier 1 PBIS, or what we do for all students in the school. We're continuing this work for Tiers 2 and 3, and all that research is actually ongoing right now. But what we found from following schools in their implementation journey for 5 years is that the most important things are these 4. One was implementing as a team, as opposed to having one champion who's doing this process. And it's interesting because one of the things we found is that having one person who's extremely passionate about it, especially if they're a school administrator or a district administrator, that's a really fast way to get initial implementation up and going, and moving from installation to initial implementation to full. But what happens is those leaders, champions, superheroes in doing the work are almost always going to be moving to different positions. They're going to get promoted because of the work, or they're going to get moved to another school that really needs their help. And so having a champion is great until the champion leaves and people don't know actually how to implement. So that team-based approach was number one. Schools that used a team, and actually not just had a team, but actually worked together really well. And don't make an assumption that just because we're a bunch of humans in a room together that we actually know like how to hold a meeting that's productive. I hate to say it, but many of us are in meetings that just don't, meetings or teams that just don't work well. And I think sometimes we're a little embarrassed or think like, this is just how teams are. And that is definitely not the case. It doesn't have to be anyways. So number 2 is to measure fidelity of implementation and use it for decision making. So when I say fidelity of implementation, I'm talking about what the adults in the building are doing to make sure that the core features are in place. And so I think one of the, as you were asking before about sort of secrets of success, one of the things that we've been able to do is build these efficient self-assessment tools for school teams to use that are research validated for assessing fidelity and freely available. But I think one of the things that's really key is to measure at least once a year. Ideally, we'd think about doing this quarterly. But I think one of the things that people fall into, and this is just a normal sort of educational trap we fall into, is we just get fixated on a score. So we say like, oh my gosh, we need to be 100%. And if we're not 100% implementing, then we're terrible people. And really the score means so much less than the act of doing it and being able to identify what's our next step for implementation. That's what those tools are most useful for, is saying, well, by the time you're done, you say, okay, we got a snapshot of where we're going, where we are right now, and then what are the things that we need to do to really improve outcomes for more students. So that's number 2. Number 3 is using and sharing the data that are available. So in the PBIS world, the data that are most available because of requirements would be school discipline data, meaning office discipline referrals and so on. And to ask people to fill out these forms and then never share it back with them or never tell them, what happened with that student when you wrote up the referral, that's not a very good way to get accurate, useful data. And so what we found is the schools that shared their data back regularly with their staff, and even, on a monthly basis, were far more likely to sustain than those who just, even if the teams used it for decision-making monthly on their own, but never shared it back with the staff. So to be able to identify challenges and being able to find these patterns of negative interactions and catch them early and correct them and put little plans of implementation into place is great. And then the fourth thing for us, even though we think of PBIS as a school-wide whole school approach, that is true, but the best outcomes in terms of sustained implementation, reduction in use of office referrals, exclusionary discipline, increased racial equity in school discipline, all come mostly from classroom implementation. So you can have a school that's doing great PBIS in the hallways, in the bus area, assemblies and all of that. And if you're not able to do those same really effective practices in the classroom, then, what is the students are getting, maybe a third of their day at best in a PBIS school. And then otherwise it just isn't. And I think sometimes we get trapped into this idea that if we're talking about systems level classroom implementation, I, as a teacher, have to do it exactly like the teacher next to me and the teacher next to me and my teaching partners and my whole grade level and my entire department or whatever. And that really is not the case. It's that focus on core practices and then saying, how does that work in my classroom? How is that going to fit with the students that I have, with the content that I'm going to teach? And so attention to classroom implementation is absolutely key.